I stumbled upon this article and how William Cooper, in his book Behold a Pale Horse, planted seeds of QAnon conspiracy theory. I was reading this, and I know this is just QAnon, it's just a psyop, just to get us controlled opposition, But anyways, there are some things that I stumbled upon this article, and I will also be going through Mark Jacobson's book, Pale Horse Rider, that I have on my phone here. But I wanted to, if you want to go ahead and find this article and read it, go ahead. A lot of it's just propaganda BS to make the truth, look bad. So you can go ahead and read this. But there was some stuff that caught my eye that I thought was very interesting. About Bill Cooper. Talks about his little bit of Bill Cooper's history. Okay, so anyways, it's later in this article here where he starts talking about some side of Cooper that his audience and his fans don't know much about or don't acknowledge. Anyways, that. So anyways, well, and by the way, an interesting note is that the chapter in Behold the Pale Horse where Cooper put in the original text of the Learned Elders of Zion, Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Yeah, the new one, that chapter is deleted now. The New Age Publishing, a company that published this book, the Swanson, the book's publisher Swanson, yep. She deleted that chapter, interestingly, because it's anti-Semitic. Right. Or they didn't want to give people any ideas, right? That's who really runs things. But anyways, I'm sorry, I'm just let me get down here. Dang it. Glenn Jacobs says he was close to him until, I believe, the late 90s or so, whatever, but he says this is about Cooper. Jacobs also said his friend, Bill Cooper, who favored Chivas Regal, drank heavily, a habit that worsened over the years. Jacobs said Cooper had crawled into the bottle and pulled the bottle in after him. Jacobs and his wife were regular visitors at Cooper's home. Typically, Jacobs said Cooper's children would greet them in the driveway, but one day Cooper opened the door shirtless, which was uncharacteristic. He also had a large bandage on his side, which Cooper attributed to a gardening accident. No one else was home. Cooper told Jacobs that he had moved his wife and children to a place where no one could harm them. Jacobs said something seemed off. After leaving the house, he notified authorities that he suspected his friend might have killed his family. Cooper hadn't. Instead, according to the FBI files, his wife had left him and with their daughters moved to California. She spoke with federal agents, according to FBI reports, beginning in the summer of 1999, giving them details of her husband's daily routine of financial activities. The government dropped its case against her in March of 2000. Cooper, however, was telling his radio audience he had moved his wife and children out of the country for their safety, and that is true. That's what he was saying. But is all this lies? I'll get into that book here in a minute. Of course, he turned on Jacobs after making that accusation that he had killed his family. I mean, he might have been a little operative. I don't know. Talks about his family here. Cooper's relationships with his siblings were also fractured. According to heavily redacted FBI reports and interviews with agents, relatives said they would try to visit with Cooper around holidays out of a sense of obligation, but that his drinking and belligerence made for unpleasant encounters, especially if they challenged his beliefs. One relative said the motorcycle accident that resulted in Cooper losing his leg was not caused by his being chased by CIA agents, as Cooper often claimed, but was just a regular accident. Cooper's widow Annie and his oldest daughter could not be reached for comment by the Republic. His younger daughter, in an email, declined an interview. Cooper's twin siblings both declined interview requests. In an email, Cooper's sister said she wanted her brother to rest in peace. So, it's Alex Mason Jones there, the controlled op. Talks about a lot of things, but anyways, that's the town of Eager, as seen from up a hill on the former property of Milton William Cooper in Eager on August 19, 2020. That'd be a beautiful place to live with a beautiful view. Yeah, this is the incident that supposedly got the cops to want to arrest him. A doctor, Scott Hamlin. Of course, people in his circle might accuse Scott Hamlin of being an agent shill little rat that lied. I don't know at this point. Hamlin saw a truck roll up the street. Hamlin had never met Cooper because he came up on his property. You read right here. To watch, show his wife and daughters a spot where, as a kid, he would watch storms roll in. As Cooper's vehicle, obviously this was Cooper, as the vehicle approached, Hamlin said he told his family it was best they drive away. Cooper followed the car 2 miles down the hill into town into the family's driveway. Hamlin said he scrambled to get his family inside and then approached Cooper's truck. Cooper, Hamlin said, jabbed his finger at Hamlin's chest and, using some choice words, told him to stay off his hill. He also accused Hamlin of surveilling him. Hamlin said he grabbed Cooper's hand and pushed it away. He also told Cooper he didn't know who he was. Cooper then pointed a gun at Hamlin's head and told him he should find out who he was, and again to stay away from the hill. He called the police, Eager police. So anyways, that's what happened there. And, you know, and this just might be BS, and maybe they did deliberately set him up to kill him. As I once believed without a shadow of a doubt. Can read that. This is grave. After reading a little bit of Mark Jacobson's book, Pale Horse Rider, I come to understand that Bill Cooper might have been a very troubled soul. Very sad in a lot of ways. I mean, but I don't know. Did every single person turn on him, including his friend Doyle, because that's who helped Mark Jacobson with his book. That's who he interviewed, and that's who he hung out with a little bit too while he was writing this book. Anyways, see, for a while, Cooper's radio show soldiered on without him, hosted by a man named Doyle Shamley. He had helped Jacobson with his book, so whatever's in that book, you notice you don't hear Doyle Shamley saying any word about Mark Jacobson, what he said about Cooper in his book, interviewing his wives, and his daughter Jessica. He hasn't come forward and said that this man is lying on Bill Cooper. So, if I'm done with this video and there's some Bill Cooper fans watching this video and you try to accuse me of promoting a work that is lying on him, then you need to ask yourself the question, what does that make Doyle Shamley then his right-hand man at the time? Because that's where that's where a majority of the information that Mark Jacobson got came from, a lot of it. I'm getting to the stories where he cited Cooper that you guys never knew. There's his wife, Janice Pell. This is the next page over. So anyways, can read that. It's about one of his wives, Janice Pell. He married her in 1976, according to here. Bill Cooper's father, Jack. The number of Bill Cooper's marriages remains unclear. In his voluminous FBI file, Cooper's father, Jack, is quoted as saying that his son had been married or engaged at least 9 times. According to Jack, Bill was still in high school when he got engaged to his 17-year-old Japanese girl. The older Cooper had to break it up. A year later, living on Tinker Air Force Base near Oklahoma City, Cooper again got engaged to another young Asian woman. I had no idea what I was getting into, said Janice Pell. One minute he'd be the sweetest, warmest guy, then he'd change, start yelling at me for no reason. It was like living with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Janice says she tried to make a go of the marriage, especially after she became pregnant with the son, Tony, who was born in 1978. We were living in Union City near Hayward. Bill was working in Oakland at the diving school. He'd get up at 6 to drive to work. I tried so hard to be a good wife. Every day I'd clean, make dinner for him. I'd set a nice table, waiting for him to come home. In the beginning, he'd rush home, give me a kiss, bring flowers. It was great. Then he got home later and later. It could be after 10 or midnight. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. I'd be beside myself, trying to find out if he was all right. It was really awful. I'd sit there at the dinner table, looking at the cold food, and cry my eyes out. When he did come back, he'd say he was tired and go straight to bed. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was all my fault. Worse was the drinking. When Cooper was drunk, he could be a monster, Janice said. He'd get abusive, mentally, and after a while, physically. I tried to make excuses for him. The war, his leg. He always told me the men in the car would come back and finish the job. That's the men who supposedly ran him off the road. He describes in A Behold a Pale Horse where that's where he lost his leg. That was what kept him on edge, he said. I was afraid of him. He was this huge man, really strong, like a giant bear. If something happened, he'd always come back and apologize. He always came back and apologized. He'd cry and say he didn't know what got into him. He didn't even remember what happened. One day he hit me, gave me a bloody nose, knocked me out. I called the hotline. They told me to get out of there. Tony was just a little baby then. The next day we drove Bill to work. Just kept going. We moved in with my parents in Los Altos. I only saw him one more time after that. Then he drove up to get his stuff. I thought he might stay a moment, talk to his son, but he just got the things and left. For years I thought about filing alimony papers, but I never did it. I just didn't want to be involved. My life improved. I married a very good man, but I still had feelings for Bill. I cried when I heard he was dead. A few months following his breakup with Janice Pell, Cooper was back in Long Beach. Once the bustling Coney Island of the West, the town had fallen on hard times. Its art deco housing in disrepair, the famous Pike amusement park an increasingly seedy ghost of itself. Cooper was working in the naval shipyard on Terminal Island when he ran into 30-year-old Sally Elizabeth Jordan at Panama Joe's. Quote, "She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life," unquote, Cooper later told the Hour of the Time audience. A self-identified California girl, Sally worked as a hostess and bartender at private parties, but she wasn't working that night. "I was waiting for a friend," remembered Sally, speaking on the phone from her current residence near Eugene, Oregon. Quote, "I grew up in Long Beach. My brother was born in the same hospital Bill was." The town was changing, getting rougher, but Panama Joe's was still nice. A lot of sailors were there because of the port, but it felt a little special, a place to go, unquote. From across the room on that particular night, Sally recalled she could see this big guy looking at her. "I thought he was someone else, this policeman I knew. When I told Bill that later, he wasn't happy. He always hated cops. Anyway, he flashed a really big smile. Bill and I started talking," Sally said. "I liked him, but he was smoking. I told him smoke really bothered me. I'm allergic. He looked me right in the eye and said, 'All right,' and crushed a cigarette into the ashtray. He said he'd been smoking since he was 14, a couple packs a day, but for me, he was going to quit. I asked him when. He pointed to the cigarette in the tray and said, I already did. He never smoked another cigarette as long as I knew him. We started dancing. He had this kind of old world formality about him. That military thing, I suppose. Very graceful dancer, very light on his feet for a big guy. It wasn't until later I realized that he had an artificial leg. You would have never guessed it. He made me laugh and all this stuff, so you can read that. They were living together. She says this about him, though. Bill could be a very personable guy when he wasn't being a complete asshole. We'd go on these little trips out into the harbor, just drop anchor. We got married on Catalina on the steps of the Wrigley Mansion. The party was at the El Galleon. Bill planned the whole thing, told the band what to play. It was great. But then he started drinking and picking fights. I guess that should have been a sign. My girlfriend said I was crazy to marry him, but I really loved him. After the marriage, Cooper and Sally opened the Absolute Image Photo Gallery near the corner of 7th Street and Redondo Avenue in Long Beach. So, talks about that. She was married multiple times herself. She was not aware that she was Cooper's 4th or 5th wife. He was a wonderful person, but he already had 4 children from a previous marriage. He didn't want to have any more. That's why I left him. I really wanted to be a mother. And he seemed to be good with kids here, as described. So she did get pregnant by him. She tried to tell him the news. It was the greatest day of my life. I ran home to tell Bill. But Cooper didn't say anything, just told Sally to get in the car. There was something he wanted her to see. We drove over to a movie theater where Apocalypse Now, the Vietnam War movie, was playing. Sally remembered, quote, "This is me, this is what I did," unquote, Bill told me. It was unbelievable. I was happy about the baby, and he takes me to watch these atrocities. Things began to go downhill from there. At one of his dive jobs, Cooper got into a dispute with his boss. Quote, Bill saw the guy inside the workroom and punched his hand through the plate glass window to get at him. He got fired for that, unquote. Cooper still soon fell behind in the rent at the Absolute Image Gallery. So, after the birth of the baby, whom Cooper named Jessica Adobe after his mother, Bill couldn't have been nicer. He was the most loving, attentive dad. He'd play with Jessica for hours. He seemed so happy. But then, just like that, he'd go off, start yelling. I blamed it on the drinking, but it was more than that. It was like he became possessed, not in control of himself. I'd tense up every time he came in the room. One night when Jessica was little, we went to Chuck E. Cheese as Bill was drinking. He got really abusive, calling me names. When that happened, you could feel it, like the temperature in the room dropped. I told him I'd had enough to stop the car, let us out. I was holding Jess on my lap. We didn't deal with seatbelts like today. I opened the door to go when Bill turned and pushed me and Jess out of the car with his artificial leg. It was like getting hit by a 4x4. We went flying. I was okay, but then I looked and Jess's tiny face was all cut up. That was it. If it was just me, I might have been able to take it, but when Jess was involved, I couldn't stand for that. Soon after, Cooper had a breakdown in the office of Sally's pastor, David Reed, at the First Congregational Church on Cedar Avenue. So, I'm thinking, some people were thinking that maybe he had this violent behavior because of his, trauma, PTSD. I had an uncle in Vietnam, and my Uncle Merle, and he came out and he wasn't right after that. Have the same Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of behavior too. And other people in my family who are vets, some turned out where they just completely turned themselves off of any memory of what they went through in the war, like my Uncle Tom. But others, like my Uncle Merle, they just never, they never forget it, and they're forever scarred by it. So I understand, I sympathize with that fact, this is all true. But I remember a show that Bill did where he was coming down on like Bill Clinton for being a womanizer, and when I read this, I don't know, it's kind of hypocritical. So anyways, there's another section of this book where I had where he meets his daughter Jessica again. That's an interesting thing, but on Annie here, I think it's in the 300s. And it's not all, bad about him in this book. I read quite a bit of it so far. I just found these, and I never knew any of this. And it's certainly him and his people around him never talked about this. So I'm trying to find out maybe it's somewhere around here. I'll have you read that, but I'm trying to find, according to this book here, and what had happened. You can read that. I wanted to So, the person that he mainly talked to in this book here, anyways, well, I shouldn't say mainly, but one of the lead guys is Doyle Shamley. I was living up there then, said Doyle Shamley. I spent a lot of time with the kids. I'm good at it for my cousins and whatnot. I worked them on sums, how to make change, things like that. Bill and Annie would argue, but I didn't pay that much attention. It was none of my business, except one day I was with Annie, and she says, sometimes I think about putting a bullet in his head. So that's according to Doyle Shamley. The siege that wasn't really a siege had taken its toll. For weeks, Annie had been stashing the kids' stuff in the trunk of the 1957 Chevy Biscayne, a classic nexus of form and function. The Chevy was an icon of American mid-century creative dominance. Cooper loved it, but it didn't run. So it became a sort of a rotting museum piece, which made it a perfect hiding place. Sorry, I'm moving. Then one morning in the spring of 1999, quite by chance, Cooper saw Annie closing the Biscayne trunk. Thinking something was up, he went to investigate. Everything was in there: his children's clothes, their favorite toys, the birth certificates, official papers he'd often told the audience the kids didn't have. It's interesting, the birth certificates that he often told the audience the kids didn't have, would never have, in order to avoid being branded, barcoded, owned by the New World Order. You mean he lied? Anyways, Cooper was horrified. For so many years he beat back the demon. He cut down on his drinking, at least for the most part, kept his temper in check. Certainly there were many unpaid bills, stuff bought on time. Rare was the day that mail from a collection agency didn't arrive. Stuff Cooper filed in the trash, but he'd managed to keep it together, more or less. He'd been a good dad. His children loved him. Now Annie was leaving and taking them with her. What happened next was an awful thing. Cooper and Annie stood screaming at each other on opposite sides of the gravel driveway in front of the house. If Annie wanted to go, that was her right, Cooper reportedly said, but the kids were the light of his life. If he ever truly loved anyone, it was them. And that is tragic. He and Pooh were pals forever. Stay with me, Cooper begged Pooh. Don't go. It was a lot to ask of a 9-year-old. Harsh words were spoken, things that Cooper would regret saying. Pooh grabbed her mother's hand and started to cry. After that, Annie and the girls got in the Bronco and drove away from Cooper Hill for the last time, never to return. It's very tragic. When Cooper next went on the air, it was April 20th, 1999, the day of the mass shooting at Columbine High School. I don't want to do this broadcast tonight, he said. I hate these kinds of things. My heart just goes out to those parents who will never see their children again. I've lost children. I know what it feels like. It is a grief that you can't imagine. It never, ever goes away. It's too bad, but again, I think he was a very troubled soul. So, it wasn't until several months later that Cooper made a statement about Annie, Pooh, and Allison's departure from the Hill. The disclosure occurred during a heated discussion on the message board of the Miscellaneous Activism Militia Group on the Radio Free Vermont website. Michael Pardo, an original member of the Veritas staff who had fallen out with Cooper, claimed that his former boss had been trying to deceive hot listeners as to the whereabouts of his family. Pardo charged that Cooper must have been drinking or smoking doobies again, since he was using taped material to make it seem that his family was still with him up on the mountain when they were not. Replying that Pardo was an atheist homosexual and liar who had been discharged from Veritas and SCAR on mental incompatibility grounds, Cooper nonetheless allowed his family had gone. It was true. Annie, Pooh, and Allison were not in Cooper Hill anymore. He'd sent them away. I made them pack, put them in the car, and forced them to go. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but he saw no other way.